Now I am honored to invite Mr. Jiten Yumnam, Secretary of Manipur's Center for Research and Advocacy, which is an Indigenous Peoples human rights organization based in the northeastern part of India. Mr. Yumnam writes for media establishments in Manipur, such as the Imphal Free Press, Sangay Express, epow.net, among others. He also published 2 books, Dams and Indigenous Peoples' Rights in Manipur and The Development Aggression, Rethinking India's Neoliberal Development in Manipur. Mr. Yumnam is also a filmmaker and produces documentary films on Indigenous people's rights and issues in Manipur, such as The Wall of Injustice, Turbulent Waters of Loktak Wetlands, and The Oil Exploration Boon or Bane in Manipur. Wow, what a list of wonderful achievements. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Yumnam.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We're so grateful to have you with us, sir. And thank you for all that you do. Our question for you is, what do you see and feel are some of the underrepresented traditions, Indigenous knowledge and practices that offer an alternative and potentially transformative understanding of the human/nature relationship? I know that is a huge discussion and that you represent so much powerful knowledge when it comes to this as well. And how can we effectively integrate and transfer traditional and Indigenous knowledge into public policy and modern technologies? What are these existing platforms and what more is needed? I feel like that's a load of questions, 2 to 3 minutes. I know you're used to discussing this conversation. Mr. Yumnam?
Thank you, Antoinette, and good morning, Excellencies and friends, and thanks for inviting us. Yeah, and thanks for the questions. Yes, Indigenous peoples hold, valuable Indigenous knowledge, is very much important in the sustainable management of land and resources, and which is very extremely important in the management of forests, of biodiversity, and also. But one thing is, Indigenous people's knowledge systems are nature-based, and it honors a complex interdependence of all forms of life, and which is very much key for the sustainable management of our land, water, forests, and everything on Earth. But the fact is, the Indigenous knowledge system and the very viable sustainable practice, it needs the close relationship with land and with our nature. And this is also important because Indigenous peoples have very strong cultural relationship with land, with the forest and nature, and many of the traditional beliefs, such as the consideration of our forests, of our water, of our river, for example, as sacred. And I think this kind of belief is also helping the preservation and conservation of nature, because I would say that in many of the indigenous communities, like many of the fish, medicinal plants, and orchids, for example, are used in our rituals and ceremonies, and many of the birds, like hornbill, for example, python, for example, these are considered as very sacred. And so, the protection of this animal, it requires the protection of the entire forest or the land itself. And I think this kind of belief, it really helps in the sustainable management of our land resources. And also the collective, inseparable, intergenerational relationship of people with the land, this also helps. And what is also important is the perception of land, because many of the Indigenous peoples can perceive our land as our source of life, as a source of our, not just for the present generation, but also the source of life, both spiritual and physical survival for the coming generation. I think this is really, really important. And this belief is opposed to the consideration of our land resources as something, a source of profit, because, like many of the multinational companies are involved in considering our land as a source of profit. I think this leads to fundamental problem with our land and environment. And I think it's also important to acknowledge the role of Indigenous women and special bearers of our traditional knowledge. And I think this really helps in the sustainable investment and also in serving the health of our environment. So these are what that offers an alternative and a to certain extent transformative understanding of the human-nature relationship. But what is concerning is the pattern of development aggression in our land and territory. Many of the indigenous people's land are targeted for mining, for dam building, for large infrastructure, for agribusiness like oil palm plantation, and many of the false climate change solutions. I think these are what that also lead to not just a destruction of environment, but also this also undermine the very viability and sustainability of of our environment, but also posing a threat to many of the indigenous peoples. And I would also echo what some of the previous speakers had presented on the non-implementation of environmental law, and also some of the formulation of the new environmental laws or new policies which are formed in exclusion of indigenous peoples and many of the local community. I think many of these policies that are formed at many of the national level are often serving the interests of the corporate bodies, and and these are pursued in exclusion of many of the indigenous and local people. And this is something that facilitates the expropriation or exploitation of the people's land and resources. I think so. That's why it's really, really important that when we talk about the integrating indigenous knowledge, what is really important is to acknowledge the importance of the indigenous traditional knowledge. The viability of indigenous knowledge, I think that recognition is extremely important, and to ensure the rightful participation of the local communities, indigenous peoples in their own in the decision making process. And extremely important is also the recognition of the people's rights over the land and resources, indigenous people's right over land and resources, and also to stop all forms of forced displacement, and to stop targeting indigenous peoples or other human rights defenders for defending their land, or or pursuing the sustainable management of our own resources, and also the development model which serves the needs, interests, and rights of the indigenous peoples. Yeah, so I would end here at this point of time, and maybe I will continue. I will join the discussion further. And thank you very much. Thank you.